Hi everybody, today is day 17 and it's hard to believe we only have 2 days left. It's been a pretty amazing adventure and I want to thank you all for coming on this big epic journey with me. This has been an incredible learning experience for me. I hope it's been informative for you too. And we have 2 days left, but we may end up doing an extra day on the 20th because it's actually Nowruz on the 20th, and it might be nice to just actually finish the story by doing an extra day on that day. So I just have to work out a couple of things with the story tonight and tomorrow. So I'll let you know tomorrow if we're going to do that. But regardless, I'm so appreciative of you tuning into these live streams and following along this journey with me. And by the way, I always do this intro at the start just to give people a little bit of time to arrive, because also, if this is your first time tuning in, you're very welcome. We're kind of reaching the end of this 19-day journey, but I'm always delighted if people are still hearing about it or just stumbling onto this live stream. And if this is your first time watching, you're very welcome. My name is Luke Slott. I'm a musician in Dublin, and I mainly focus on setting to music the Baha'i sacred writings. And for the first 19 days of March, I'm doing this series of daily live streams here at AP Studios Dublin, where I'm doing a bit of storytelling and a song at the end. And this is all in preparation for the release of my upcoming album Home of Light, which is a collection of new songs based on the writings of Abdul Baha. And if you're not familiar with Abdul Baha, he was the son of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, and he's really cherished as a role model and an example to Baha'is and friends around the world. And 2021 marks the centenary of his passing, and so hence the new album coming out later this year in his honor. So today, as I said, today is it's day 17. This is the 17th day of the annual Baha'i fast, and this is episode 17 of A Story of Light. So I actually wanted to begin today's episode by sharing with you just a little bit of my own family background and just how it was that I came to be singing these songs and hearing about this story. So when I was in my teens, my older brother Mike moved just across the water to Scotland to go to university in Glasgow, and he ended up staying in Glasgow studying and working for about 5 years. And one day he called home to tell the family that he had come across this kind of obscure religion called the Baha'i faith, and that he had been studying it, and he himself had become a Baha'i. And this religion was obscure enough that almost no one in our family had ever heard of it. Our family had a kind of a mix of backgrounds, part Catholic, part Protestant, part Jewish. And even though my brother and I had very much been raised to respect all of the great spiritual traditions of the world, I certainly had never heard the name Baha'i. And in fact, the only person in our family who knew of the Baha'i faith, as far as I know, was our mother. And the reason that our mother knew about it was because many years previously, in her own student days, long before Mike and I were born, our mother had gone on this big adventure sailing across the Mediterranean Sea, and she had travelled along the coasts of France and Italy and Greece, all the way to Israel, where the boat had finally docked in the port of Haifa. And just like everybody who visits Haifa, my mother saw on her arrival one of the world's most iconic mountains, that mountain which is acclaimed in the ancient Jewish scriptures as a place of great spiritual significance in the future. And that is, of course, Mount Carmel. And by the time that my mother stepped off that boat in the 1970s, the slopes of Mount Carmel, which for many centuries had been nothing more than a barren desert terrain, were now being cultivated into a series of gardens with vibrant green lawns cascading down the mountainside, bordered by beds of red geraniums and terracotta pathways and dark green cypress trees reaching up to the heavens. And standing in the middle of those gardens on the mountain was a mausoleum. And inside that mausoleum were enshrined the sacred remains of the Bab, the young herald of Baha'u'llah, who in the year 1850 had been shot to death by firing squad some 2,000 miles away in Persia. And the foundations of that mausoleum, the shrine of the Bab, had been built brick by brick by Abdul Baha. And so in order to understand how it came to be that the remains of the Bab were laid to rest on the slopes of Mount Carmel, we need to retrace our steps a little bit. So about a year before he passed away, when the prison gates had long been opened and the Sultan's decree had long since become a dead letter, Baha'u'llah himself had visited Haifa. He had walked through the town. He had met with those German Templars who decades earlier had settled there to await the coming of the Promised One. And in the company of his son, Abdul Baha, he had climbed the slopes of Mount Carmel. And there on the mountainside, he had given to Abdul Baha one of the most important missions of his life, to bring the remains of the Bab from Persia to the Holy Land and to lay them to rest on Mount Carmel. And this mission was to constitute one of the most astounding accomplishments of Abdul Baha's life, because when you really stop and think about this task, the mere prospect of it is enough to set your head spinning. How on earth was Abdul Baha, who was officially a prisoner in Ottoman Palestine, going to bring the remains of the Bab, remains which were under constant threat of destruction by the authorities, all the way from thousands of miles away in Persia, to the Holy Land, and to do it all in total secrecy? Well, his father had actually already started this process decades earlier. Throughout all the years of exile and imprisonment, Baha'u'llah himself had been secretly directing the Babis and later the Baha'is back in Persia to take specific, definite steps to preserve and protect the remains of the Bab. When the Bab had been executed in 1850, Baha'u'llah had directed a group of trusted friends to go out under the cover of night and retrieve the bullet-ridden remains of the Bab from the forest in which they had been dumped to be devoured by wild animals. And over the following years and decades, Baha'u'llah had directed those friends to transfer the remains of the Bab from one hiding place to another in cities and villages throughout Persia. And so over a period of 60 years, the remains of the Bab were moved in total secrecy from place to place in a simple wooden casket hidden in people's homes across Persia. And of course, throughout this whole time, the homes of Baha'is were being constantly raided and ransacked by the authorities. And somehow, Baha'u'llah always sent instructions to whoever was hiding the remains of the Bab in their home to move them to a new hiding place. And invariably, they would be moved just in the nick of time before that home would be raided. And so, towards the end of his life, Baha'u'llah had passed this mission on to Abdul Baha, and in the years after Baha'u'llah's passing, Abdul Baha began this mission. On the one hand, he started the process of secretly transporting from Persia to Palestine the remains of the Bab, remains which he knew that if the authorities discovered them at any step of the journey, they would desecrate and destroy them without a moment's hesitation. And at the same time, Abdul Baha began the construction of a shrine to house those remains. And so day by day, month by month, year by year, he coordinated the secret transportation of the remains of the Bab on this perilous 2,000-mile journey from Persia to the Holy Land, and where brick by brick, stone by stone, he built this shrine. all the while dealing with the attacks of his brother Mirza Muhammad Ali and the constant threat of execution by the Ottoman authorities. And after 10 years of unremitting labour, in the year 1909, the very year in which the despotic Sultan Abdul Hamid fell from power, and the revolution that was to result in the total disintegration of the Ottoman Empire began, Abdul Baha completed his mission. The remains of the Bab had been safely transported to the Holy Land, and the shrine had been built on the slopes of Mount Carmel in the exact spot chosen by his father. And on Nowruz 1909, Abdul Baha placed the wooden casket containing the remains of the Bab into a beautiful marble sarcophagus that had been donated as a gift from the Baha'is of Myanmar, and his mission was complete. And in God Passes By, Shoghi Effendi gives us this really dramatic description of this moment when Abdul Baha completed this mission. So, Antimo, can you put up the slide, please? When all was finished, and the earthly remains of the martyr prophet of Shiraz were at long last safely deposited for their everlasting rest in the bosom of God's holy mountain, Abdul Baha, who had cast aside his turban, removed his shoes and thrown off his cloak, bent low over the still open sarcophagus, his silver hair waving about his head and his face transfigured and luminous, rested his forehead on the border of the wooden casket, and sobbing aloud, wept with such a weeping that all those who were present wept with him. That night he could not sleep, so overwhelmed was he with emotion. And so the remains of the Bab, who 60 years earlier had given his life to prepare the way for Baha'u'llah, were finally laid to rest on the slopes of Mount Carmel in the shrine that Abdul Baha had built. And by the 1970s, when my mother stepped off the boat in Haifa, the landscape surrounding that shrine had been transformed from a barren desert into a mountain oasis. And so for today's song, I'd like to sing for you an extract from a tablet written by Baha'u'llah, in which he addresses in this kind of poetic dialogue this mountain which throughout history has been revered by Christians as the mountain where Christ walked, and by Jews as the place where the prophet Elijah dwelt in his cave, and now through the direction of Baha'u'llah and the strenuous efforts of Abdul Baha had become the final resting place of the Bab. So if you're fasting today, I wish you a very good fast, and I hope you'll join me tomorrow for day 18 of A Story of Light. This is called the Tablet of Carmel. All glory be to this day. All glory be to this day. The day in which the fragrances of mercy have been wafted over all created things. A day so blessed that past ages and centuries can never hope to rival it.
Thereupon the voices of all created things, and beyond them the concourse on high were heard calling aloud. Haste thee, O Carmel, for lo, the light of the countenance of God, the ruler of the kingdom of names, and fashioner